Welcome back to Bizarre Books, the channel where I narrate the books that no one else will. Some may find content from this channel disturbing, so viewer discretion is strongly advised. If you derive value from this channel and want to support my efforts, please consider donating via the links provided in the description below this video. If you do donate, you can request a specific book or chapter that you'd like to hear me narrate. The Gates of Janus by Brady, Chapter 2. One must have a good memory to be able to keep the promises one makes. One must have a strong imagination in order to feel sympathy. So closely is ethics connected with intellectual capacity. Nietzsche. The Allied judges at Nuremberg, in justifying their condemnation of German war crimes, proclaimed, "Any immoral law must be disobeyed." But as the history of warfare has profusely illustrated since, the countries responsible for this grandiose principle of judgment meant it to apply only to Germany and not themselves. To the freethinker or relativist, personal beliefs and principles, rather than external social dogma, dictate action. Truth be told, we owe genuine loyalty only to our loved ones and close friends. It is to whom we give our word that matters, not the giving of it. People often blind themselves to the harsh moral dichotomy that the harms they would not do to a loved one or friend can be perpetrated, without any significant qualm, upon strangers. Whatever laws you believe you have the right to break, accepting the possible social and legal consequences, you will do so willingly and without remorse. But it is patently superstitious to believe that all law-breaking automatically exacts some degree of personal remorse. In general, politicians, intelligence personnel, and criminals only bother to heed laws when they are not tempted to bend or circumvent them. Law, to such individuals, is likened to an interesting and often irritating obstacle course. To be bound by law distinctly advantages those who are not. It is therefore the duty of the powerful and overprivileged to frame laws that exploit and maintain this status quo. The social elite, like the criminal, allow no law to defect their purpose and are adept at using legality against those who oppose them. Will you not admit that sometimes it's a most stimulating experience to do something you don't want to do, don't approve of, and are legally proscribed from experiencing, just to discover new aspects of yourself and others? This reflects the low intelligence of the censorious in many instances, or political corruption and greed, as in the case of the powerful alcohol and tobacco lobbies, whose products kill millions annually, but who advocate the outlawing of less harmful drugs such as cannabis, purely to maintain high profits and tax yield. Does virtue have its own reward? You may live a blameless life and perform charitable deeds for 70 years and 10, but if you ultimately commit one crime, you nevertheless become a criminal. Those of you who are forever baying for harsher laws and punishments should remember the blatantly obvious truth that the very wealthy and powerful are the lawmakers, and that no one accumulates such a high degree of wealth and power by honest and legal means. Crime does not pay, except for the elites, of course. With the underclass even deprived of the hope of honest work, crime remains the only feasible option for survival. The American private prison industry also operates on that premise. Glossy brochures to shareholders proclaim, "While arrests and convictions are steadily on the rise, profits are to be made from crime. Get in on the ground floor of this booming industry now. With the advent of a new administration, stocks for the private correctional management firms, crime-fighting sector and security industry will jump even higher than their current growth rate. Just consider the current inmate populations in adult facilities combined with population growth of juvenile detention centers. Invest now." Shareholders have a vested interest in making sure that prisons do not reform and rehabilitate. Society need not worry about unemployment or care about the underprivileged, as long as enough prison warehouses are constructed to store those forced to commit crime in order to survive. This mercenary political program, inducing others into crime rather than providing jobs and adequate welfare, could be construed as a criminal offence in itself. The age of reason and hope is in terminal decline. The ruling elite are abandoning even the paternal pretense of thinking in terms of general welfare. So why should anyone else? Robbed of traditional identities and social cohesion, the underclass of the West are now spiritless in their submission. Yawning gulfs have come between the very rich, the middle class who serve them, and what one might cynically describe as the economy class, which is now being replaced by robotic technology. As the dispossessed turn more and more naturally to crime, it becomes financially expedient to imprison them in service to corporation, an even more faceless dictator than the state. But the time is fast approaching when demand will outstrip supply. Chaos shall have its day, and brute force its revenge. Whatever section of society is out for blood, one thing should be kept in mind. Before seeking revenge, dig 2 graves. Prisoners have relatives and friends in the outside world ready and willing to balance accounts. What better circumstance and material could a resentful, hopeless prisoner ask for to school in the study of crime and revenge? He has at his constant disposal a veritable army of budding psychopaths and psychotics serving short sentences, ardent for knowledge and instruction, eager to re-enter the community and try out their newfound ideas of social justice. Justice? During the Vietnam War, those who burned their draft cards were jailed for refusing to kill, and sat side by side with convicted murderers. Different cause, same effect. Should the thought occur to you, this book and every view, sentiment and expression in it is written by my own hand from a cell in which I've spent the past 3 decades and will remain until I die. Any adverse criticism you may form over the contents will not cause me to retract one measured word. You will presently discover that this work is not an apologia. Why should it be? To whom should I apologise, and what difference would it make to anyone? You contain me till death in a concrete box that measures 8 by 10 and expect public confessions of remorse as well? That species of feigned repentance extorted at show trials? Rid your mind of that expectation. I will not cater to the moral pretensions of the bovine, nor will I flatter retarded authority. Remorse is a purely personal matter, not a circus performance. Who can truly distinguish the point where self-pity ends and compunction begins? The certitude of my death in captivity paradoxically confers a certainty of belief, a freedom of thought and expression most so-called free people will fail to experience in their lifetime. Unlike the mere physically free individual, no hellish circles of social graces and ersatz respect bind me to censor beliefs. I am not under the least obligation to please by deceit any individual whomsoever. To all practical intents and purposes, I am no longer of your world, if, as you might suggest, I ever was. I am now simply a curious observer, resistant to 30 years of blur and blot. Is it so perversely singular to postulate that compassion for mankind in general is empirically inconceivable? That such ostensible human empathy, when so widely distributed, loses all meaning and substance? Is such an over-ambitious, compensatory claim of universal benevolence in reality a clear admission that one has, in fact, no deep feelings worth speaking of? Even Jesus smote the money changers, but that metaphysician habitually preached the impossible anyway. Know thyself? We find it far simpler and more emotionally satisfying to believe we know others. It deflects self-analysis. If a psychiatrist is leading a worthless private life, a failure even to his family, he could be of far more assistance to his patients by explaining his own faults, his own mistakes in life, from which the patient might benefit through avoidance. I am applying variations of that principle in these opening chapters, by the end of which perhaps some of you will know my faults and strengths. The majority will think they know them better than I do. The reader rightly expects to share the psychic, ethical and moral perspectives of the serial killer for a change, anticipating that beliefs and rationale are expressed with articulate candour, devoid of any attempt to gain sympathy or acolytes. I have never seriously set out to corrupt anyone. I believe the seed of corruption is already within us all, requiring only the right primal incentive, circumstances, or utilitarian stimulus in which to blossom. The degree, nature, and cultivation of corruption depends almost entirely upon the innate criminal propensities of the individual recipient. The extent of his or her natural predatory instinct and capacity for independent thought and social relativistic analysis. In this particular, I am unavoidably in unholy accord with the theological doctrine of original sin, but from a secular premise. My present state of psychic evolution should now be distinct to some. One purpose of these opening chapters is to assist a few in appreciating the roots of my reasoning. When most people approach middle or old age, as I am, they opt for increasingly greyer decisions, in contrast to the vibrant black and white of younger years. Some obtusely regard the tendency to compromise a sign of wisdom or tolerance. I regard it as selling out, and retirement to the comfortable grazing of the flock. Thanks largely to authoritarian stupidity and the spectrum of human savagery and absurdity witnessed and experienced by me in decades of imprisonment, and an absence of personal ambition, my relativistic beliefs and philosophy are very anthropically preserved in convictions of glacial ice. At this moment I continue to value personal loyalty and friendship even more. The coining of golden rules is not always the prerogative of those with gold. We can now resume in a deeper condition of mutual understanding, I hope. To further early ambitions pragmatically and at maximum speed, I must confess that I selected associates who visibly possess advanced criminal potential. A test question was, how much money would you kill for, considering you would do it for a pittance in the army? The amount chosen was irrelevant, the act of positive choice paramount. Any moral or ethical equivocation I encountered led me to bantering disengagement, when I falsely implied that discussing murder was hypothetical, a philosophical indulgence. I wonder what it's like to kill, many would ask, and naively, am I capable of killing and getting away with it? The stuff of amateur detective novels. Beyond good and evil, there is no self-doubt, the opposing values being complementary sides of the same coin. Self-conscious good or evil is equally counterfeit. Spontaneity in the enactment of both is the essential mark of purity and distinction. Only self-flattering posers claim predominant ownership of good or evil. Without exception, we fluctuate between the two, both qualities being regulated mainly by social conditioning. The vibrancy of evil requires the threat of external force for its containment, and the drive to be good requires narcissistic self-interest or delusions of grandeur. The majority of people naturally enjoy the idea of running with the fox, but their heads, their pack instinct and keen sense of survival urge them to ride more safely with the hounds. The vast popularity of crime in the media and entertainment industries suggests most people spend their lives envying the certitude of belief and ability for action possessed by the professional criminal. They are, as it were, impatient for the villain to appear on stage to liven things up, and if he appeared in real life, what then? Shock and trepidation. For instance, if someone you trusted were to offer to rid you of a lifelong enemy, a nagging wife, an obstacle to your promotion or some other important ambition, giving a complete guarantee that no suspicion would fall upon you, would you feel tempted to accept? I believe most people would initially at least be tempted. The notion would emotionally attract. Then delayed caution would prompt secondary considerations. A. Is the guarantee genuine? B. Accepting that it is, what if something goes wrong? C. Is someone who makes such a proposal sane or to be trusted, and, if not, would I eventually be regarded as a danger and disposed of in a similar manner, or be blackmailed? D. Can I even afford to show for one moment that I am the sort of person who would seriously contemplate such a proposition? These and many other imponderables predominantly reflect concern for self, not the criminal act or the fate of the intended annoying victim. However, I believe the majority of people would eventually, albeit begrudgingly, begin to feel deep unease. A sense of stark, disturbing, stomach-churning reality they had never before been forced to experience. A daunting consciousness of alien power and personal responsibility. The absolute prerogative of a Caesar or divinity. To decide someone's fate with casual ease and indifference. A cold-blooded, primal capability they amorally and even proudly assume they and everyone else possessed as a birthright. Most people do possess the ability to kill when given government permission which obviates or diminishes personal responsibility and penalty, or in the collective irresponsibility of a mob. Significantly, in my unorthodox experience, almost everyone, after considerations of self-interest, consciously or subconsciously approaches the academic question of murder on mainly aesthetic grounds, not moral. They will enthusiastically discuss or ingest every conceivable horrific method of successfully destroying their enemies, experiencing no moral pang, only keen enjoyment at exploring and contemplating the fatal possibilities and painful variations. Philosophical parlour games and semantical acrobatics soaring free of moral gravity also proliferate. For instance, if a killer of 6 proved that he had consciously refrained from killing a dozen other victims he previously had at his mercy, why should the dozen acts of clemency be of lesser moral significance than the 6 fatalities? Are good and evil primarily matters of arithmetic? Is their significance like success measured by a stopwatch? The following moral question is a well-known moral parlour game. Say, before the start of World War II, you were standing beside Hitler with a concealed gun. Knowing or believing that 50 million people would die in a future war, would you have killed him? Would you have considered the assassination a criminal act, or felt remorse? Would you have realised that, by killing him at that crucial period in history, Hitler would be respected today as one of the world's greatest statesmen and strategists? Do you have an inner statute of limitations on your own crimes? As years have passed and you are no longer the person who committed or would repeat such crimes, do you believe you should not be punished? Would you honestly sacrifice yourself simply to satisfy the abstract principle of public deterrent or divine secular justice? In which case, do you still believe that a captured criminal who has similarly altered with passing years should continue to be punished regardless? As already indicated, law-abiding souls must have their victims too, experiencing no guilt at how pleasurable it feels to punish others for crimes they themselves have contemplated or succeeded in getting away with. Further, in punishing others for crimes, they actually feel they are making retribution of some sort for their own. That's why punishing others subconsciously feels so good. Beneath the civilized veneer, man remains the supreme predator. Cursed with what he believes is understanding, his true soul blossoms godlike in the heart of the nuclear inferno. Again, only does punishment and retaliation frighten him, not the crime. Practically everyone believes they could write a book or compose a song if only they put their mind to it. They believe this simply because they can easily comprehend the finished products of others. It is not until they attempt the task of creation themselves that they become conscious of their own limitations, lack of imagination, abysmal powers of self-expression, and how unaccustomed they are to thinking deeply about anything at all. Becoming aware of the vast gap that exists between understanding and personal creativity, and the intellectual effort required to capture and express a complex idea in simple terms, is humiliating. The art of psychological profiling is also subject to a misapprehension as to its complexity. As soon as something is interpreted for them, readers or listeners tell themselves it was obvious anyway. They blithely credit themselves with the author's insight or common sense, In a psychic precinct, most people self-protectively avoid approaching anyway, in case they bump into themselves in the dark alleyways of the mind. Had they been asked to interpret the psychological aspects of a murder, the result would probably have been a long, confused silence. The subconscious defensive inertia of self-analysis combines with a social reticence to admit, even remotely, of sharing and understanding the psychological drives and thought patterns of a serial killer. In liberal guises, the law-abiding masses will assure you that they do wish to understand, but that such atrocities are far beyond their pristine comprehension and delicate sensibilities, even if they work quite happily in armaments or biological warfare industries. Distance ameliorates any responsibility for monumental carnage, but the act of an individual killer shoves the spilled guts right under their noses. Bad manners is the crime. End of chapter 2.